Hi, I'm Charmin Fairbanks McKinney of FairbanksHistory.com. Today I'm taking you to West Yorkshire, England of the 1600s with a focus on the Fairbanks ancestors. My sister and I toured northern England in preparation for my historical novel, Made to Last Forever. We climbed to great heights and followed every path to open the doors of England for you. We met relatives we didn't even know. The top photos are all Fairbanks relatives. Other people knew our family, churches, lands, and homes. They say, "Aye up, hello from England." Thanks to Ruth Joseph Fairbanks and James Swan Landberg, we know our relatives were in the West Yorkshire area as early as 1455. We'll concentrate on John Fairbanks and call him the father. He was the father of Jonathan Fairbanks, who brought his family to Dedham, Massachusetts, when it was a part of the early Massachusetts Bay Colony. We'll call him the immigrant. West Yorkshire, England is across the Atlantic Ocean. It's in northern England, close to Scotland, and all of England is the size of Alabama. At the same latitude, it's cooler than the U.S. in the summer and warmer in the winter with less snow. It gets lots of rain, and the northern England has the Pennine Hills and Chains. If you walk them, they feel like the mountains. Note the rock walls of Yorkshire that divide the pastures. We shall go to Halifax. It was the parish center in the 1600s. It's about 200 miles from London. Sorby was larger than Halifax before the 1600s, but is only 3 steep miles away from Halifax. It was the home of Jonathan the immigrant. Thornton and Craven is 30 to 40 miles from Sorby, the home of John Fairbanks the father. Ings in Westmoreland is known as the origin of the Fairbanks name. In Halifax is the St. John the Baptist Church, now called the Minster. Jonathan the immigrant and Grace Smith were married there on May 20th, 1617. 4 of their children were baptized there also. Notice the font. It is the original font. And the font cover is also the original, only then it would have been bright colors, red, greens, blues, and golds. Halifax was also a market town. A town had to be given permission to have markets and fairs. If they were given that permission, they had to erect a market cross. Halifax's was just across from the Cross Inn and Pub, the oldest pub still standing in Halifax. No doubt Jonathan had a pint of ale there. All inns had a barn associated with them. These held the horses of travelers and pack horses of the wool merchants. In the 1600s, the buildings were made of gritstone base with a timber frame and plaster upper section. This is the Swan Inn. It still welcomes staying guests. The cafe at number 1 is one of the oldest buildings in Halifax. It shows the bright color of the framing. That's how it would have looked in the 1600s. Up the hill from the market and toward Sorby is the gibbet, or guillotine. It was used from 1286 to 1650, long after Jonathan and his family left. There's a saying about the gibbet: "From Hull, hell, and Halifax, the good Lord deliver us." The punishment for wool thieves was severe. Wool was the lifeblood of England. There was a Fairbanks, George Scroggan, who lost his head in 1623, a year before the son Jonas was born. We found no direct links to Scroggan Fairbanks. The Fairbanks motto is "Finem Respica," live for the end. If you followed that motto, you'd never fear the gibbet. Oh yes, I tried it on for size. Wool production, all phases, was the lifeblood of England. Pack trains carried it on narrow trails, from raw wool to finished cloth. The short, stout horses had pack saddles with baskets on either side. Each area specialized in a different wool cloth. West Yorkshire's was kersey, a thick, water-resistant wool that was used for British uniforms. Today it's used in peacoats. Next we go to Shibden Hall. This was a typical house of the wealthy in Halifax. Jonathan Fairbanks was of the middling economic level. In the 1600s, Shibden Hall would have been only the central part with the gritstone and the timber frame. Look at the kitchen. It was called the hall. It was made to feed many people, but in many ways it looks like the hearth at the 1637 Fairbanks house in Dedham, Massachusetts. If you go to Shibden Hall, go out back to the craftsman shops. You'll see St. Crispin Pub. In early times, this pub was located close to the St. John the Baptist Church. A stocks was also just outside the church. Many were punished for drunkenness or not attending the church. They were put in the stocks for the neighbors to ridicule and pelt with rotten vegetables. However, if the criminal had friends at the pub, they might just bring him a beer. Then notice the cooper or barrel maker shop. George Fairbanks, one of the sons, was a cooper. There is also a wheelwright shop. They didn't have carts in Jonathan's day, but Jonathan made wheels for spinning the wool into thread to be woven into cloth. Next we go to Sorby Township and Sorby Town. It's the ancient lands of the Fairbanks. It's about 3 steep miles from Halifax. From Halifax, you might stop at Old Brig Chapel Park before going over the Sorby Bridge that crosses where the rivers Calder and Ryburn come together. The Old Brig or Bridge Chapel was small. It was a church of ease. It was easier to get there every Sunday than to go all the way to Halifax. On the 1804 map, you will see the Fairbanks land. Bridge Bottom, was land just on the opposite side of the river from the Old Brig Church. Brockwell was further west. Here you see the steep path down to Brockwell, overlooking the River Ryburn. Just past Brockwell is Piggy Lane. It might have led to another property of the Fairbank, Piggle Croft. Next was the gatehouse, a guardhouse to keep trespassers off the land. Some will recognize the name Gock-Rogers Platts. The Gock-Roger Platts owned Old Huh End in the 1500s. Mary Gock-Roger Platts married John Prescott and was a relative of Grace Fairbanks. The last place shown on the map was St. Peter's Church. John Fairbanks, the father, is believed to have been a church warden there in 1601. Note the galleries above the nave. Either the poor sat in the gallery or sometimes the wealthy, so they'd be closer to God. The 2-tiered pulpit allowed the church leader to preach to both the upper and lower levels. In very early history, no one sat. The leader preached to a standing crowd only. Now we go about 30 to 40 miles north of Sorby to Thornton and Craven. John Fairbanks, the father, and his third family lived in that area from about 1613 to 1625, when he likely died of the plague. The first house we come to is the Great Hague House. Some believe this is the house of the father. There are 3 Hague houses about a quarter of a mile apart. The Great and Middle Hague House share a well. Families of that time often shared houses or moved from one to another based on the space needed. The Little Hague House has been modernized. However, across the lane is a very old trough, and the path that runs beside it has gate stones to keep the horse travel from using it. Between the Great and the Little Hague houses is the Middle Hague house of the 1500s. This is where we stayed overnight. Stones for it were mined on the property. The walls are as thick as your arm's length. The owners have preserved many of the original features. This is the back of the Middle Hague house. It has a 1618 addition that possibly John Fairbanks added. He had land here starting in 1617. Notice the owl hole on the addition. Owls were invited into the storage area above to keep the mice out of the grain. The scalloped edge is also from the 1618 period. We know it was the 1618 time because of the date stone. On the date stone is H for Hague or Helen, I for John, which they used at that time, and an E or F for Helen or Fairbanks. The initials and their meaning are not positively known. Inside, we see the fireplace made of the original stone. It goes straight up into the priest hole, where the clergy, Catholic or Puritan, was hidden depending on the current king's religious preferences. It is believed the house was 3 stories at one time, and the religious leader came through a trapdoor on the 3rd floor, down steps made into the fireplace stone to his hidden room. There would have been no windows. Other features you see here are mullioned windows and the original wooden beams. This area of England was known for witches, particularly the Pendle witches of 1612. The Pendle witches lived over toward the sun on the hill. The Moloch witches were on the next hill over. The stone of the front door appears to have engravings, perhaps to deter witches from entering. I believe one looks like a snake and another looks like a bone. Jonathan Fairbanks, the immigrant, is believed to live in this area about 1627. Jonathan and all his sons had a good basic education. There was a good school founded here in 1600, the Irby School. It even taught Latin. Jonathan and Grace's sons, John and George, would have been old enough to attend. St. Mary the Virgin Church of Thornton and Craven predates the Fairbanks families. John Fairbanks, the father, was buried there in 1625, only 4 days after he made his will. Susan Fairbanks, Jonathan and Grace's second daughter, is believed to have been baptized there in 1627. Notice the sheep mowing around the cemetery stones. St. Mary's Lagill, the name means the church was close to a ravine, was even closer to the Hague houses. It was at Barnoldswick. It could have been the Fairbanks Church of Ease. This church was originally built by the monks in the 1100s. Notice the large timber by the door. In early days, during raids, everyone went to the church and barricaded the door. Here again we see pew boxes and a multi-tiered pulpit. Bells were important in all English churches. They practiced and took much pride in their bell ringers. The ringers pulled ropes to toll the bells in the tall towers. This is just a practice handbell. Now we go to Ings, near Kendal and Staveley, Westmoreland. Fondly it is called the Lake District. This is beautiful country where many English go for holiday, camping, biking, and hiking. It is very near Scotland. We can only find loose connections to this area, but it is believed by a famous historian, George Redmond, who wrote the Dictionary of Yorkshire Surnames, that this is the origin of the Fairbanks name. Break the name down, Fairbanks. Many names depicted the surrounding land of the family. These people lived on the fair banks of the Gowan River, the swiftest river in England. We climbed the steep road for about a mile till we reached the outer gates of the High Fairbanks farm. It is one of 3 Fairbanks farms nestled within about a quarter of a mile of each other. Michael lived at the High Fairbanks farm. He didn't know we were coming, but he graciously invited us in when he found we had the same name as the farm. The house dates back to the 1200s. The house, the white side, was built directly onto the barn on the left. The house still has wooden beams dating back to the 1200s. Michael recently found a leather awl in one of them. Other features like the fireplace stone and a living area wall are old features. At one time, 6 families lived in this house, not including the barn. We asked Michael if there was an easy way to get to the Middle Fairbanks farm, now called the Gowan Bank farm. Michael said we'd have to walk about 2.5 miles to go by road, but we were welcome to walk across the cow pasture as long as we closed the gates. Being farmers' daughters, we welcomed a 4th mile walk on ground familiar to us from our past. George met us at the Middle Fairbanks farm, or Gowan Bank farm. The house was completely rebuilt and is about 1/3 larger than the old house. Some of the barns are made of old stone. George has made cottages out of some of the barn areas, so you can stay there when you visit. George told us it was too rough to go over the pastures to the Lower Fairbanks farm, so we walked down to the Gowan River, about a mile, and got a ride to the Lower Fairbank farm, Fairbank wedding barn. The only thing old about this farm are the wedding barns and the land. Please take a look at the URL displayed to see the beautiful land of the Fairbank farms. Baa, baa, baa. Sheep were the lifeblood of the 1600s England. The English would say ta-ra, or goodbye to us now. This trip to the Fairbanks land of West Yorkshire, England, was inspired by the historical novel Made to Last Forever. It's the story of Jonathan and Grace Fairbanks and their family leaving the turmoils of the 1600s England and risking everything for the promise of opportunities and religious freedom of the newly formed Massachusetts Bay Colony. They struggled mentally and physically to settle and build the Fairbanks House in Dedham in 1637. It is now the oldest frame house still standing in North America. The Fairbanks Family of America Incorporated still owns and runs the Fairbanks House as a museum. It is on the National Registry of Historic Places and is a National Historic Landmark. Everyone is welcome. The 121st National Fairbanks Family Reunion was held there in 2023. If you would like to see more of the West Yorkshire, England tour, or more about the early Fairbanks or Massachusetts Bay Colony history, go to fairbankshistory.com. Thank you for joining me, Charmin Fairbanks McKinney, on this historical journey.